It's all compulsions. That's what it is. That's how I see eating disorders and drinking. It's all compulsive behaviors. And so neurochemically, like, you have to fix that, because rigidity is often corrected by, like, glutamine balances blood sugar. Low blood sugar, you become very rigid if you have a bunch of, like, catecholamines in your prefrontal cortex. Phenylalanine, they find that people that are addicted to alcohol have lower levels of dopamine, right? And so that helps with them. Bulimia, same thing, lower levels of dopamine. So it's all interconnected. It's just whatever that person, like, chose to use to manage their anxiety, alcohol or an eating disorder.
Thanks for tuning in to the Elevation Recovery Podcast, your hub for addiction recovery strategies, hosted by Chris Scott and Matt Finch.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Elevation Recovery Podcast. I'm Chris Scott, and today we have Brianna Thoreau as our guest. Brianna has recently joined the Fit Recovery team and is a coach. And also, I don't know if I've even officially announced this, but we have some new courses coming out sometime in the next 6 months or something like that. Brianna's making an awesome course, as will coaches Tana and Matt Finch. So Brianna, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I know you had put out a very interesting article and video on the psychology of drinking or of addiction. And a lot of people were fans of that. We're getting really good traction on YouTube. So I urge anyone to check that out. And you listed a couple reasons for people to drink. And this is something that I reflect on often. It's kind of like a chicken and egg thing with the biochemical pillar and the psychological pillar. So it seems like there's a spectrum. Some people like me, or like Claudia Christian, who was recently on the show to talk about the Sinclair method, we envision our addictions as, if not exclusively, then primarily biochemical. And of course, there's a biochemical component for anyone who's dependent on a substance. But my reason for starting drinking was that I went to college, which is a pretty universal reason for starting drinking. It almost seems like why did you start drinking? I had a therapist ask me that once, and I was like, that's the stupidest question I've ever heard. Like, have you ever been to a party? That's why I started drinking.
Every other reason, like, to fit in, right?
Exactly. So do you see that kind of as a spectrum as well? Because then you also have people who will have a horrible divorce, and they went to college and they drank, and they never got physically hooked, but for whatever reason, something happened, or it crept up on them. Just the amount they were drinking, maybe they were escaping, and there is a psychological layer that's more pronounced for them.
Yeah, there's definitely always psychological layers, I think, with any addictive habits. But I think that the biochemical part has to come first. Because if our brain isn't functioning correctly, then we can't do the work psychologically to reframe thoughts, right? It's just going to be incredibly difficult. And that's where you get the terms like white knuckling, right? Is when your biochemistry is all messed up and you can't make rational decisions at all. And so I do think that the biochemical part has to come first. And then you work on the psychological aspect. I don't think that you can separate them completely, because then next time you go to a party, even if your blood sugar is balanced, your neurochemicals are fine, if you want to fit in and you told yourself that the only way to fit in is by drinking, then you're going to drink, even if your neurochemistry is fine.
So you have these false assumptions, right? And you have to explode those proactively, and you have to identify them.
Exactly. A lot of people look at drinking as like completely caused by other things. Like trauma is a big one that I hear a lot, that they were traumatized at some point in their life. And so that's why they drink. And that's not true, because over 90% of people that have a history with PTSD, 80 or 90%, I'd have to look at the numbers, do not drink or use substances to manage their condition. So if it was completely causal, then every single person that was ever traumatized would use. And that's not what we see. So
that's a fantastic point. Yeah. And I remember when I was in the traditional detox center that I went to, I was told that I had to have trauma because I was a so-called alcoholic with a permanent disease. And the drinking was just a symptom of my disease, which was caused by trauma. So
Exactly.
we have to be nuanced in the way we talk. And this is more of a note to self. You've been incredibly nuanced. I often talk about the biochemistry of addiction. And then I have some people say, well, what about trauma? I don't think it's, it can be layered, as you say. But for me, I'm sitting there in detox trying to figure out what trauma had caused my addiction. And we had to write it down. So I made up a bunch of stuff. I mean, I didn't make it up out of thin air, but I wrote down things that had happened that had never really had any impact on me. I mean, we're talking about like almost on the level of like someone took my pencil once when I was in second grade. I'm trying to find things like, yes, I had things happen. I have a hearing impairment. They could go, oh, that was it. And then they were like, you have a hearing impairment. I never wore hearing aids. I've somehow learned to read lips, and it has been a non-issue ever since then. Yeah, I can somehow talk on the phone. My brain has somehow compensated for the hearing loss. So if you were to step into my ears or have my ears for a day, it might be very confusing, but I've learned to adapt and deal with it. I probably miss some things. If someone's behind me yelling my name, I might not hear it because I do rely a bit on like peripheral lip reading and all that. But anyway, I can tell you, it's not a source of major trauma that would necessarily and inevitably result in an alcohol addiction. So
no, not causal at all.
Right. Now, of course, for some people, there is trauma though. And one of the big questions I still haven't fully resolved is, when those types of people who have a divorce or something really traumatic, a rape or a horrible, violent crime, and then they develop an alcohol addiction that they had never had, is there a change in their brain chemistry that could create a predisposition that wasn't there since birth?
Well, there could be a predisposition, but it is a choice, though, if you pick up a substance to manage those feelings, right? For reference, I've had severe trauma in my life. I was married to a very physically abusive man that strangled me till I was almost dead, gave me concussions. I did not drink during that time. And I had PTSD, I developed OCD, I did not drink. But through my divorce, I had freedom and I was socializing more. I rationalized it differently. And so that's when I had my drinking issue. It's because of the reasons that I was using. So I don't think that the neurochemical imbalances from trauma, like usually you have a higher state of like adrenaline. I don't think that has to be like muted with alcohol. Will it make you more predisposed? Yeah.
Right.
But you could do anything to manage the anxiety. Like it doesn't have to be.
It's not an inevitability. It's not causal in the sense of being deterministic. You could have picked up opioids if those reacted well to your brain chemistry, or you could have developed some strange, behavioral addiction, or you're hoarding things like, and maybe you get a different, what do they call that? A process addiction. So, Yeah,
that was me. Went through my trauma. I developed OCD. So
okay.
I was coping through behavioral things, but the problem with alcohol, when we look at it as a solution to trauma, is that it causes more neurological issues. So you're less likely to overcome and heal from the trauma.
Alcohol, being such a damaging substance, tends to create its own subset of psychological problems that are strictly attributable to the fact that someone starts drinking and becomes dependent on it. They become deficient in all these neurochemicals. Their life suffers as a result because of the actions they make with an unbalanced brain. That's kind of how I see it too. I did have psychological problems for sure, but I had been drinking for 10 years. And the vast majority of my psychological problems could have been traced to the results of drinking day in and day out, or having my relapse periods and abstinence periods again and again, going through kindling, not being the confident, fit person identity that I really wanted to have, and that I since regained ever since quitting alcohol. And then once I realized I'd regained that, the absurdity of a permanent spiritual disease began to be apparent to me.
Yes.
Yeah. So, in your experience, do you find, you say that you like to deal with the biochemical part first. Um, how long does it take people to heal their biochemistry, in your experience, versus the psychological issues?
It's a lot quicker to fix biochemical imbalances than psychological, because psychological issues are from a lifetime of conditioning, and a lot of them come from before we're even aware of our psychological processes. By the time you're 7, you have a lot of your programming done for you by society and your parents, your conditioning on what to expect from the world at large, right? And so it takes a lot of work to undo that. That's why it's really important to fix the biochemical stuff first, because you're going to be able to grasp and work through that stuff a lot easier. Time, it really depends on how much they were drinking before. Like, some people it takes like 3 months, some people 6 months, some people a year, right? Depending on their drinking history.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. I find that people tend to gain a certain degree of resilience, or realize that they're more resilient than they thought, once they start using supplements and targeted nutrients to repair their neurochemistry and really their brain-body system, and integrate things like exercise, which maybe without those nutrients, they would not have garnered the energy in order to walk into the gym. So it's like these things, which are somewhat behavioral, like, do I make time to work out? You could approach that in a strict therapy type session. You'd be like, well, what are the reasons that you don't work out? It's like, it's a lot of it's biochemical, and you find that you actually do have that strength. And then you go on to prove that you have the self-efficacy to be who you want to be, and do things that you want to do. And then your beliefs about yourself change. And for me, I don't have the same level of background in psychology that you do. It was a series of books, actually beginning with some of Tony Robbins' books, which helped me realize, how much control I actually had over my thoughts, my assumptions, my values, all of the things that I just were kind of running an autopilot in the background.
Yeah, we don't think about them until we consciously pay attention to them either. A lot of people that drink don't know why they drink. They just drink because they say they either like it, or they're at the stage where they know they don't like it, but they're like, why do I keep doing this thing? Well, there is reasons. You have rationalized it somewhere. So is it bringing you more pleasure? Like, that's where you have to find out what is driving the use, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think fixing biochemistry, like, even if you do that, like, if you're put in a situation that is familiar, that you numbed out, then all those reasons will go in your head. And that's when people relapse, usually, like, years after. Sometimes their biochemistry is still messed up, but sometimes it's not, and they still do that, and it's all the reasoning that's going on.
Right. I've actually heard from some people who, as odd as it sounds, tried to relapse for no good reason most of the time, and then they found that alcohol simply didn't have the same effect that it used to. It didn't fill the void. Yes, the void. Well, maybe there wasn't a void, though. In other words, they're putting a puzzle piece onto a complete puzzle, and they're kind of like, ugh. And I actually got a text message from someone, a former client, being like, you ruined alcohol for me. I'm like, well, that's a great result, isn't it? Because then you realize that you don't need to live the rest of your life with a phobia of thinking you're so fragile that introducing a inanimate chemical into your body is going to ruin your entire existence. It might be incongruent with your identity, and so then it might be something worth addressing. It might be a bad idea because it's extremely toxic and there's not a lot of good that comes from it, and the trade-off's pretty bad. I mean, at this point, there are drugs that I would love to do. I'd like to microdose psilocybin. I would like to see what effect that has on my mood. I'm not opposed to like THC or CBD tinctures. Like, I see the universe as consisting of all of these possible methods of mind alteration, including things like exercise and getting massages and going to the beach, going, skiing, going on jet skis, all these things.
And do it by spinning in circles. Like, we are designed to seek out changes in consciousness, right?
Yeah, we evolved to do that. And so it just turns out that alcohol is a pretty suboptimal method for doing it. And sometimes people discover that. And I'm not encouraging someone who's 2 weeks off of alcohol with a hard-fought victory right now that they're working on to go back and drink. It takes months, potentially years, to rewire your brain. But it's worth knowing that you don't need to be terrified or live with a phobia of alcohol for the rest of your life.
I think that fear also comes from the misunderstanding. A lot of people don't really understand why they drink, and they think they don't have control over their hands. I deal with this a lot with binge eaters too. They don't realize, I know it sounds super silly, but they don't understand they have control over their hands. And so they walk around in fear all the time. And I'm like, you have control over what you put in your mouth, like 100% control. No one will ever make you ingest anything you don't want to. And so that allows like the anxiety to come down a notch for my clients too.
I don't know a huge amount about eating disorders. I assume that there's some neurological overlap with things like alcohol addiction.
Parallels.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I developed a lot of compassion for people that I think I previously would have written off as careless or reckless or stupid based on a snapshot assessment of their appearance, until I went through my issue with alcohol. And I mean, I myself ended up gaining a lot of weight when I was drinking. Some people tend to lose weight and they just eat less and, they stop absorbing nutrients. I'm sure I wasn't absorbing nutrients, but I would eat disgusting things when I was drinking. So I just tended to gain weight, and it would make me inactive. My workouts sucked. So I was like, I feel like maybe I remember thinking maybe I had like a food problem at the same time, because when I would drink, I would want to eat the worst stuff. I was like, maybe all of this is interrelated.
Yeah, so when you drink alcohol, it reduces leptin for up to 48 hours after. So that's why people tend to eat junk food the entire time, right? And if you're drinking all the time, then your leptin's suppressed. Same thing happens with eating disorders like anorexia. Leptin is also suppressed, and that's what causes them to keep doing the behaviors that they're doing. It's all compulsions. That's what it is. That's how I see eating disorders and drinking. It's all compulsive behaviors. And so neurochemically, like, you have to fix that, because rigidity is often corrected by like glutamine balances blood sugar. Low blood sugar, you become very rigid if you have a bunch of like catecholamines in your prefrontal cortex. Phenylalanine, they find that people that are addicted to alcohol have lower levels of dopamine, right? And so that helps with them. Bulimia, same thing, lower levels of dopamine. So it's all interconnected. It's just whatever that person like chose to use to manage their anxiety, alcohol or an eating disorder.
It's funny
or
that
other substance.
Dopamine is often framed, at least by implication, as the culprit in addiction. It's the bad thing that we're chasing, because the alcohol is causing an artificial release of dopamine, and that's why we do it. And same cocaine, dopamine, like almost synonymous. It's like the problem isn't necessarily though the fact that you have dopamine, is it?
No, dopamine is a motivational chemical, so it's more of seeking out an activity. So a lot of people that use like cocaine or harder drugs, it's the ritual of going and getting it, and that is the dopamine hit. It's not even necessarily the use of the drug that heightens their dopamine. It's the behavior of going and getting it and accomplishing it.
I actually have had some clients who, even after quitting drinking, would continue some bizarre rituals that they would do, some of which were not good, shoplifting being one of them, even after quitting drinking. And like, they would be flabbergasted at this. It was like, what is going on? Why am I doing that? And the way I understood it was that there's still this dopamine-laced neural pathway associated with the process of what you were doing. And we have to extinguish that by crowding it out. Like, you need to go to spin class when you would be shoplifting or whatever it was that you were doing that was not good. Going on.
Dopamine engaging behavior at that time is what I usually have my clients do too.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Another like dopamine engaging behavior,
Yes.
like motivational behavior in place of that, and crowding it out like you were saying.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, like, going on like shitty Tinder dates, and we used to get drunk, but like now you're going on 5 of them a day instead of, instead of 1 and then drinking. So yeah, it's very odd how the brain works, but dopamine is not a bad thing, and it's a good thing. We want to probably increase levels of these things and just make sure that people are able to utilize them in conjunction with activities that are good for them in the long term.
Yeah, everything is like a cost benefit analysis. And I always say that I'm wired in a way to be addicted to like anything. So I better choose my addictions very carefully. Right. And so when I quit drinking and doing any kind of substances, what I started doing is I started writing. Right. And that hits my dopamine pathway just as good as anything else, because I get a reward from figuring stuff out and publishing it.
I write pen to paper every morning when I wake up, and I get that's like my first buzz of the day. And it actually, I didn't always do that. I did that when I was in a horrible place and detox, because I had nothing else to do, and I figured I should. It felt obligatory, but I figured I'd want to look back at this bizarre time of my life. And then after reading The Miracle Morning, which Matt Finch had suggested to me, I think a year or so ago, I started getting back into it. And it's one of the best things that I've done. It's like, I love to write. And now I write in a kind of weird masculine way where it at least starts out as like lists, and like everything's very like direct and to the point. But if I get in the right state, things start to flow, and I might get a paragraph here and there. I guess everyone has their own style, but writing can certainly be a dopamine boost. But I tell some clients will say, I know I'm supposed to rewire my brain so that I like to write in my journal, but I just don't like doing it that much. I can't. And they'll say, in fact, I don't like doing anything right now. The only thing I want to do is drink. And so it's hard sometimes to get people to understand that that's an illusion. We tend to view reality through the lens of our biochemistry at any given moment. And so we have this neural pathway associated with drinking, or probably a series of them, and they're all like, firing. Like, what about us? What about us? And it's overshadowing everything else.
Yeah, and especially with binge drinkers, they tend to have had higher lows and highs, right? And so it takes a while to get accustomed to not like seeking out something that is giving you that high of a high, right? Mm-hmm. You need to resensitize your brain, so to speak.
I found when I resensitized my brain, what I expect to feel was a kind of bleak existence where things weren't that much fun and things just didn't bother me. So I figured, from what I had heard from people who did the traditional, long-term 12-step model, was that life's not as exciting as it was when I drank, but I also don't have panic attacks every day. So I was like, I don't know if that's a good trade-off or not. But so I think because of the biochemical repair, that sounded depressing to me. But because of the biochemical repair and getting into fitness, I found that actually or at least when I resensitized my brain, my best highs are honestly better than when I was chasing an alcohol high. My baseline then was so low. It's like my baseline had been reset low and I didn't know it. So now I can get a much better high having a conversation with my good friend from college when I'm in the car, and I'm laughing, and it's way more fun. I feel physically better than I did when I was drinking a bottle of wine, trying desperately to feel that way. I couldn't do it. And now I also don't have, obviously I'm not having panic attacks every day, so that's good. But my highs are at least as high as they were. They just make more sense. Exactly.
And I think all of us are unique on what does it. I definitely have to have exercise in there because I have endorphin issues for sure. We talked about that before. I'm on low dose naltrexone, but I have to go do an intense workout when I feel that super low, right? Because I need the contrast of a high. And it's way better than anything you can get from a substance though, right? When you go and do an intense workout, that kind of high is way better. And then you don't feel like crap too, right?
Yeah, the feeling after an hour of hot yoga in a 105-degree room, or for me, my MMA sessions when someone's basically trying to kill me for however long. Just the primal feeling of I am alive. That's kind of what I wanted from alcohol. I never really got it. Obviously, I got some highs from alcohol, but they would progressively dwindle as my brain chemistry deteriorated. And I became actually deficient in the very neurotransmitters that I was trying to artificially release. But now with a balance, it's I know which things work for me, and it's kind of effortless to get a series of highs throughout the day. It's like I have ups and then flats throughout the day, but the flats aren't bad. It's just like you need to recoup. You can't have constant highs all the time, but I don't really have that many downs anymore. It's kind of amazing.
Yep. I think a lot of the people that do like the 12-step model, I'm not like bagging on it or anything, because I think it does help people, but I think a lot of that is the sense of powerlessness too, even if like a lot of them are probably inflamed too. So that's probably what leads to pleasure deficits, right? But even if they're not.
Have inflammation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like just from eating crap food and being overweight, right? But even if they're not, I think the sense of powerlessness and that you have no control over your life and your hands gives a lot of people like underlying anxiety where they can't feel really good because they're always in a state of like, I need to be hyper vigilant of everything around me and control my environment, and that's no way to live.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies.
Exactly.
Beliefs that we can ingrain that become self-fulfilling prophecies, the powerlessness being one of them. And I think for me, it could have been, if I had allowed myself to believe that long term, it could have become an excuse for not doing things that I should have done, or choosing not to take risks, or choosing not to
live full life,
become my best self and live fully. Yeah.
Exactly. That's how it would have played out for me too. That's just not my personality. I can't do that.
Mm-hmm. It's also a potentially self-fulfilling prophecy if you think that you're going to be addicted to something, though, or anything, right? Yep. And that's something that you've probably thought of before, because I have said that before. I remember for about a year after I quit drinking, I would tell people I had an addict brain, and that was a bit extreme. Like I probably, if I don't now, then I've definitely had endorphin issues. I like you, need to go to the gym if I want to feel like fantastic. It's hard for me if I haven't worked out in like 4 or 5 days, which doesn't happen often, but I think it happened at some point during the pandemic when my gym was closed and I'd ordered a weight fest and it was raining and I just didn't want to go outside. Yeah, and I was feeling kind of blah, and not bad, but definitely blah without the exercise. So yeah, I'm sure I'm dependent to some degree on the exercise, but I no longer say that I have an addict brain, because I'm not accusing you of saying that either. But when I did say that, I feel like there was a risk of that being a long-term self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, and then you think you will become addicted to anything you take in, and you don't listen to your body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they've never isolated any kind of gene that shows any addictive like personality, so. What I mean a lot when I say that, it's just like an inference to like who I am. Like I'm extra with everything, right?
Right. Yeah.
Everything that I like.
Yeah.
Like I'm not worried about, but.
I had someone tell me that I was an extremist, not ideologically. We weren't talking about politics, but I was like, yeah, I think that makes sense. Like I have funny little extreme habits. Like I tend to, I like to keep a 10-hour eating window if I can, sometimes 8, sometimes 6. And if I go to a restaurant, it's not uncommon for me to order like 2 or 3 entrees. And then the waiter or waitress will say, there's no way you can eat that. And I'll say, watch me. Like,
you're like, I work out.
Yeah. Like, I guess that's extremism for some people.
Well, yeah, that's my personality too. Like, it's the same. I'm sure you're the same in the gym too. Like when you're lifting, like you just push yourself to your limits, even without someone standing there, like trying to micromanage you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's how I am too.
I think that's a good trait, though. I'm happy I have that. I mean, I guess some people don't. The issue of genetics is interesting, though, because I've long puzzled over this. I feel like, and I'm not a geneticist, but there's never been a gene that determines anything. It's a collection of genes that, until we probably have some ridiculous AI algorithm that has mapped the genome and everything else, and its relation to neurochemistry, and probably if you want to do like a full analysis, you need to know what our environment is, all of the inputs from our emotions, what we're eating, what the air quality is, what chemicals we've breathed in through our life. If you could map out all of that, I bet you could say that because you have X, Y, Z, and a million other genes, or maybe 100 other or 1,000 other genes, you have a slightly higher incidence of being addicted to something. I bet that does exist, but there's no one gene that determines anything, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely the case. I think we'll never have the ability to test every variable. So that's why I don't take a deterministic like viewpoint on addictions, though, is because I'm like, there's people that have had a whole host of like variables input into the same system that you're working with, and they just decided one day they were going to stop. So if that doesn't tell you that you have some kind of free will around your addiction, like, I don't know what does. I know it doesn't feel that way because I mean, I've been there. It does not feel that you have free will, but you do.
I mean, I often say I quit hundreds of times and failed to quit because I would go back to alcohol. Yeah. But the last time I quit, it worked. So I must have free will because it was my idea to quit. But exactly. My free will had been insufficient for the prior, we'll say, 150 attempts at quitting. And I'm a pretty strong-willed person, and I'm someone who will, be self-motivated, go to the gym, do 10 sets of 10 for squats or whatever at 75% of my max, and, just tough it out. But whatever sliver of free will I had back then was not strong enough. And I think that's because I had no idea of how to fix myself biochemically. I didn't even know that I should. I didn't know what was going on biochemically. So many people just conclude that who are actually strong-willed people, conclude that they're bad people and they're weak. And really, it's just all they need is a blueprint for biochemical repair and psychological repair. And of course, I like to talk about the biopsychosocial spiritual model, and all of these things are kind of intertwined. But social strategies and spiritual development, these things are important too. And all of it, it's all layered together into the same thing. You can have a transformation even if you failed 150 or 1,050 times in the past.
And I think that addicts tend to have more determination than most people, because how many people will get drunk and deal with those hangovers every day and then go get their drug of choice again? Like, that takes a lot of determination to put your body through that.
I like to say I'm lazy. I'm too lazy to be a heavy drinker anymore because it was so fucking hard to get myself to work. Like literally buttoning my shirt in the morning with a cold sweat and like trying at my bloated chin. It was always right here. The alcohol would cause bloated chin and I'd feel unattractive and horrible. And my hands are shaking, trying to get that button. And of course I was going to be 15 minutes late if I was lucky. Trying to get the button to actually go into the hole was infinitely harder than starting a website and having it rank on page 1 in Google.
Exactly. It takes a lot of determination.
Yeah. But you're right. I think people...
We just have to position it well.
Yeah, and people who go through that just tend to have a lot of willpower. It's just untapped. And what they haven't given themselves is a viable strategy for harnessing the willpower.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times the reason why it takes so many times to quit, right, and we say we're never going to do it again, is because we haven't worked out all the reasons. We still think we hold on to some sliver of hope that we're going to be able to learn how to do it right? And we have to get to a point where we're like, okay, we're never going to be able to learn how to do it just so, or we would have already been there, right? We wouldn't be dealing with this issue.
Exactly. Yeah, I think as long as there is an illusion that alcohol needs to be part of your daily routine, at the very least, right? Because for some people, it's too much to say, you need to quit this forever. For me, like that would have been too much, even though my whole life had been ruined by it. I didn't really want to think about that. I got to the point where alcohol had been totally pushed off my priority list. And I was like, all right, I'll never drink again. I don't care. But I think some people, they don't want to think about that. But you can say, look, it makes sense, doesn't it, that alcohol is not going to be a normal part of your daily routine. Because if it is, then you're probably going to have a problem. Like drinking every day. Now they just revised the guidelines for safe drinking. I think it's down to, like they used to tell men they could have, was it 2 drinks a day or 3? They decreased it to like 1 or 2. I don't know if there was some some PC issue there, because I think the implication was for women it's like 0. But basically alcohol's bad. Or is it 1 for women?
0.
Okay.
And so I'm writing an ebook on cancer too right now, because I had cancer. And I go into all the research on cancer and alcohol, right? And even one drink and moderate drinking, like a couple units a week for a woman, increases her breast cancer risk by 30%. That's like very moderate drinking. Like, how many people actually only have 1 or 2 glasses a week? Not very many.
Exactly.
So your risk goes up the more you drink.
Yep. Yeah. And so I think that if someone can focus on trying to reorder their daily routine such that alcohol has no place in it, then, I mean, life is just a summation of days. So if you keep living your best possible days and alcohol is not part of the daily routine, because it really shouldn't be, then at some point you literally stop caring. You're like, oh, well, good riddance, and that's kind of the only thought you have.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, Brianna, we could talk for hours, and I'm sure we will, but I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.